And look at that. We passed right by my deadline for starting the show, and I didn't notice because I was chatting in the comments. Hello, everybody. Good morning, where I am. My name is Margaret Pinard. Welcome to my channel. You're on BookTube. So, what do we have today for this Sunday slot? I'm actually doing a TBR / pile of possibilities. So I sort of transitioned away from doing these. At the end of last year, I figured they weren't very interesting to just profile a book that I hadn't read yet. However, preparing for readathons, you sort of have to strategize if you want to participate. So it does require some planning. And I really wanted to do some reading for the IrishReadathon. I'll tell you why in a moment. It's going to be some spring cleaning, but yeah, just wanted to say hello. Someone else wants to say hello. Yeah, that's Bean. Bean says hello, everybody. So yeah, ask me about the IrishReadathon. It is run by Aoife at Words of Clover. Her video link is in the description, and co-hosted by Leanne Rose. Her channel link is in the description. So if you're curious, they have a video each and more of recommendations and musings on the prompts that they have done. So I think this is like the 5th or 6th year for this, so very successful. And they've got some of the same prompts as last year. So I'll be talking a little bit about ones that I am doing and ones that I'm not doing based on my approach to readathons. So yes, and I've got a couple questions for you, so stay tuned to the scrollers. You may have to pay attention later. I just want to say hello to RC. He's working on some stuff. Nice to see you here. He's got a Substack, so anyone interested in horror and dark things and short fiction and maybe a novella coming up soon can tune into RC Scott's channel. And then Jeremy is here saying, ooh, so very excited. Happy Sunday. Jeremy, I don't know how you did in the recent storms, but I heard my sister lost power for a couple hours and the kids were off the devices. So, oh my God, it was like the apocalypse. Jim says hello and meow. Hello, Jim. Good evening. Yes. Novella is out, yo. Okay, the double feature and the novella. See, they go by so quickly. You're so prolific. It's just like zooming right by. So check out RC Scott's channel. On to the 5 prompts. So some of these are easier than others. We've got something with green on the cover, and I'll come back to that at the end because I'll go through the books that I'm using for some of these, and you'll see whether there's any green. P.S. I wore green. I got a little Celtic out for this morning because I've got it everywhere in my apartment. Figured I might as well use it. Green on the cover. Irish children's book, meaning written by an Irish author. And I'm not much of a children's book reader. This isn't really a channel for children. I'm not a teacher or someone who works with children, so really not interested. Not going to try to do that because it's going to take me too far off of my path. You'll see. Third one is Irish commercial fiction. So the 2 ones that pop to mind for this are Maeve Binchy, who wrote Circle of Friends, which was really popular in like 1995 when it came out as a movie with Chris O'Donnell and Minnie Driver, if anyone remembers that far back. And Marianne Keyes, who also has books with very recognizable covers because she's stuck with the same publisher. And they have, I thought it might be the same as the Shopaholic books, but it's not the same author, just the same sort of presentation. So well done. She made me think that she wrote a whole bunch more books. And here's the thing. I am very open to reading commercial fiction, but I don't have any on my shelves, Irish commercial fiction. And when I do readathons, my main goal is always to use the readathon excuse to spark motivation to read my backlist. I've got enough books to read here. I'm always like trying to read that down so that I can have room for new acquisitions. And so Yeah, I went through my Irish shelf and had about 10 books. I've already put 2 on the pile because I think I went through them last year, didn't read them for the readathon, and Marie Kondo says if you don't use something in a year, let it go. You're not going to pick it up. So I'm going to let those 2 go. I have a couple that I'm going to read for this year, and if I don't, I'm going to let them go, leave more room in my secretary cabinet because those are like research books in my area. So that's very exciting. And the only thing that leaves out is the fact that I may have Irish authors, for example, Maggie O'Farrell, who wrote the phenomenal Hamnet, on my fiction shelf. And I just may not know offhand that they're Irish. Like, did you know Maggie O'Farrell was from Northern Ireland? Right? You have to do research sometimes. And so I went through, I looked at some lists, I looked at some collections. I found that Molly Keane is an Irish writer, and I do have her book on my fiction shelf, Good Behavior. It doesn't qualify for May of the Moderns, even though that's the time frame that it's referencing or that it's set in. So unfortunately, it's sort of like one of those books that doesn't fit in, like Barbara Comans, etc. And that would be a good fiction, maybe even commercial fiction if you're going to give it a loose definition. But I flipped through, I read the back, and while it does seem something that I'd be interested in, it doesn't seem something that goes with the general tenor of the rest of the books. So I'm also going to save that one for later. But here's a question for y'all. Would you ever consider arranging your books by author's country of origin? Now, y'all may consider me bonkers for considering this, but, I had my Irish section, and it included a historical fiction by an author called Thomas Flanagan, and it's about the 1798 rebellion. I think that's one that Wolfe Tone is involved in. And it was really interesting to me because I thought it might seed something else that I would reference in a fiction book of mine, but I've had it for 10 years and haven't read it. And when I pulled it out and looked, this guy was a professor at Berkeley, and he's originally from Massachusetts with Irish immigrant parents. And I was like, oh, well, American. So, if you're going to be a serious hardcore booktuber, maybe this is something to consider. I don't know. Does anyone do that? I don't think I've ever heard, even people with very creative arrangement systems, I don't think I've ever heard someone doing this, but let's see. Hey, Shannon, good morning. I ignored the storm apocalypse and went to the movies. It was great. There's one approach. Nice. Thank you, Shannon. Have fun at the conference. So Jeremy says, no, I would not organize books by author's country of origin because it's too much work to look that up for each author. True. You know what else it would do? It would point out when we have biases. So if we have mostly American or mostly British authors, as may likely be the case for most of my friends in the chat, it would really be obvious. Yeah. Oh, organize? RC's laughing. All right. So, yeah. Well, if you're someone like me, you arrange your books, you resort your books in order to de-stress sometimes. So it happens every few months. I'll let you know that. I'll let you know the secret. Okay. So, and Jim this is a good answer. Geodiversity is something I keep an eye on. Yes. Didn't you have a challenge with around the world? People who are doing that challenge actually might be good candidates for sorting their books this way. Would all the Americans be lumped together, or would you split them with Native Americans? Oh, that's a good point. Country of origin. Well, if I'm going to go country of origin, actually reservations are separate autonomous entities. So I would put them differently. And all the Ojibwe would be with the Ojibwe, and the, Salish would be with the Salish. So yeah, that would be different. Would the British countries be separated? country of origin. Again, this may get political. Yeah. Because you have, I don't even remember. I knew this at some point. The UK is one type of thing. The Great Britain entity is one kind of thing. And, it's under negotiation, but Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland are also one kind of thing. And they're sub-country level because they don't negotiate at the table at international events. This would be helpful, though, for readathon purposes, not for political purposes. Yes. Jeremy says, yes, I like to reorganize to de-stress as well, but I never finish my winter cleaning, restocking my bookshelves. The books are still in messy piles, and now it's spring cleaning time. Yeah. Well, and this is, I assume, at home, not your books at school. Oh, I hope your books at school aren't having to be covered or sorted or any of that kind of stuff. Jim says, I'm reading Caradog Pritchard's book now, which was translated from the original Welsh. Very nice. I just retweeted a book. It's in English, but it's a new book coming out on the 14th, and there's an event in Wales. So I pinged Emma Bennett. It's called The Long Field, I think, and it's a discussion or a meditation on the word hearsaith. It's a Welsh word that's sort of about homesickness, but sort of talking about physical landscape. And I love these sort of like untranslatable words that people try to describe in another language. That's just like brain candy. So, yeah, if you want to check that out, it's in my Twitter. UK is a country of countries. Yeah, all different levels. Yeah, and changing every day. Who knows, right? But it would be really helpful for readathons, is what I'm saying. Okay, so what else do we have here? I think I have to start talking about the books. Yes. Okay, so commercial fiction. We're talking about the shelves and the arrangement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fourth prompt is a very long book, which would dovetail nicely with March of the Mammoths if you had an Irish author. I think Jim just talked about the Stalin book, and I can't remember which book he's reading next for March of the Mammoths, but I'm pretty sure there's a fair number of tomes that are written by Irish authors, so that could work, but I am not participating in that, and not really my jam. But the other possibility for this prompt is a very short book, and I do have a few of those, or short work of writing. So we'll see that. And then the final prompt is to read a book based on buzzwords that were crowdsourced about Aoife's and Leanne's channels. So the buzzwords they came up with, kind of like Buzzwordathon, are pride, home, language, spring, knowledge, friendship, dogs. Of course, if you've seen Aoife's channel, she's all about the dogs. Feminism and warmth. And some of those, like in some readathons, you don't know if the book has until after you read it. So I'll definitely be going back to see if the buzzwords apply to these books that I read in my Irish Readathon wrap-up. But for the moment, let's right out the gate, get the green on the cover. So Edna O'Brien is a fairly famous Irish writer. This is Mother Ireland. It's a memoir book, and it's quite short. It's not under 100 pages, but it's like 118. And let's see. I think something that is that short and has that much white space on the margins is maybe good enough to qualify. Sounds really interesting. Memoir as history and language, a richly imagined blend of memory and myth, truth and legend that unforgettably evokes a specific time and place. Again, brain candy for one Margaret here. So I don't read a ton of memoir, but I think this would be really neat. I think the prompts lean more toward fiction for the readathon, but what I have on my shelves is basically nonfiction because I don't sort them according to author, and I can't think of any others that I haven't read that are Irish. So that's what we're sticking with. So that's green and short. That's the theme. The next one is actually not written by a an Irish author, but it's travel writing about Ireland in the 1950s, written by this really famous author who's German, Heinrich Böll. And I heard about him because there's a foundation that I worked with called the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and they did really great environmental work. And so I was so impressed with the foundation and his work that's being carried on by them that when I saw this over a decade ago, I picked it up and was like, oh, he was in Ireland? What? What's this? So he went there with his family, and his writing is very modern for the time period and literary, and probably not my thing, but I think his like private travel recollections will definitely be more my thing. And it's been a while since I've read any travel writing, so I think this would be nice. I'm also in sort of like a nature writing streak, which I will touch on later because I found a really interesting article about Irish nature writing. So even though this isn't an Irish author, I think I'm going to read it along with this and use this, as I said, as an excuse. Then we've got another memoir sort of folklore book. This is called An Old Woman's Reflections by Peg Sayers, The Life of a Blasket Island Storyteller. And oh my goodness, this has a lot of dialect and slang in it. Blasket Island, I think, is one of the tiny islands on the West Coast. If, again, no one else has heard of this besides me, but if anyone else has watched the movie The Banshees of Inisherin, I can't remember what it's called now. Anyway, the recent movie with Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, and the Irish accents are off the hook. So I maybe will watch that in preparation for this book. But I've dipped into it a few times, and it's interesting. The tradition in the British Isles of folklore collecting and music collecting is not untouched by sort of colonizer vibes, I will say, because it only started happening when it became rare, just like with Native Americans in America taking pictures, preserving garments, writing down myths and legends and religious practices. That only started happening when it became rare and sort of separate from the culture. And so, it's interesting to consider the content alongside how it happened and how it was gathered in the historical context. So I think she died in the 50s, so this is probably like 1920s to 1940s setting tales, but related later in her life. So it's another Peg, and I thought that would be a cool primary source to dip into. Oh boy, let's see. RC says he's reading Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, one of the greatest and definitely the goriest westerns he's ever read. I read Satri by Cormac McCarthy and was not a fan, but at least I can say I tried him. I did that for a book club, and nope. I tried it, RC. Jim says England was the only country in the World Cup without its own national anthem. Really? Huh. That's interesting how they let them in the World Cup separately. Yeah, football clubs that aren't... Oh, wait, no. Football clubs, that's a separate competition than the Olympics or the World Cup. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. Let's just leave that subject alone because I might get in trouble. Jeremy's reading a book with a green cover right now, The Evening and the Morning by Ken Follett. I still have not read Ken Follett, but yes, I hear he's fantastic. So are you reading that for March of the Mammoth? Because as I suspect, Ken Follett always writes mammoth books. Cormac McCarthy, his raw, concise writing speaks to me. Don't know why. Yeah, I could see that. Okay, so I got two more. We've got this collection. It's a great Irish short stories edited and introduced by Vivian Mercier, who I don't know. And basically, this is one of the ones that I'm going to read and probably hand off. It's got all like the classic writers from the early 20th century: Samuel Beckett, Lady Gregory, James Joyce, Sean O'Fallon, Liam O'Flaherty, James Stevens, J.M. Singh, W.B. Yeats. And I've read a few of these, but I'm interested in reading the Lady Gregory story and then, passing it on. 75 cents. Yeah, you don't get books for that anymore. So that's going to help make room on the shelf. And then my final one is another collection. But this is not all Irish authors, but it's based around a theme called Irish Hunger, edited by Tom Hayden. And this has more modern writers. And when I have peeked into this, there are really... I wouldn't say concise. I can't say that because I haven't read it yet, but definitely raw accounts or memories. And I really like the way they laid it out. So obviously we're going to context. We're going to say the Irish potato famine in the 1840s that also reached other places and decimated the populations there because of inequality and the power structure of the time. Has led to lots of changes in the world, but in Ireland itself, it made millions of people emigrate, changed the social structure, etc. And so they've got confronting the ghosts, remembering the famine, identifying the malady, continued troubles, and I'm sure they picked that word advisedly, making history, recognizing the victims. So I feel like it's going to be a more expansive examination of this historical event than I've seen. I mean, I've got a pretty good understanding of what happened and what the main points of the debate or the controversy in the debate are, but I think this will really expand that, and I got a reason to read it. So hopefully you'll crack into this and really enjoy getting more into the historical context, because that's my thing. Ooh. The first football international was England v. Scotland. Yeah, I don't understand how they make those rules. I'm pretty sure it's because it's just so old a rivalry that they were allowed in. Like, would you do that for two regions in Paraguay that compete against each other? No. It's a privilege thing, I think. It's like a grandfathered in thing. Jeremy says, yes, the Ken Follett is a mammoth. Well done. Leslie's here. Hi, bookskers and purrs. I just finished Woman Hollering Creek by Sandra Cisneros, but I wasn't into her prose. Okay. This is the month that Leslie is featuring all writing by Sandra Cisneros, I think, which is an admirable project. I think the authors that you've had lined up so far, I haven't really been into or read much of, so I can't really comment. I've only read one by Cisneros, so I hope it gets better as March goes on. Jim says, at most international sporting events, Scotland uses Flower of Scotland, which my voice is not quite back to 100%, so I won't launch into song, but it's by the Corries, one of my favorite folklore duos in the world, even though they're no longer in existence. As its national anthem, England uses the British anthem, God Save the King. Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I would have assumed. But I don't think Flower of Scotland is an official anthem. So, I mean, using God Save the King as an unofficial anthem sort of makes sense to me in that equivalency. I don't know. So that's 5 books. If you're thinking, well, what about your diversity tracker, Margaret? You don't have any ebooks, you don't have any audiobooks. And again, I can't search Libro.fm for which books are written by Irish authors. And the recommendations in Leanne's and Aoife's book videos aren't anything that I already have. And I'm trying not to acquire new things, using the backlist, trying to work down that ancient TBR. So that's just going to be the Irish focus for the month. It's nonfiction. So I hope that doesn't upset the apple cart with the hosts of the Readathon, but that's sort of what I have and what I'm excited about reading. So hopefully that works. The one other thing I was going to touch on was about the nature writing piece. So I did remember that I said I would talk about this. So when I think of Ireland and writing about Ireland, I want to read nature writing. And so I tried to look up nature writing books and see if I had any of those. The Heinrich Böll journal is sort of like getting into that. But apparently it's not a very done thing. I found this article. I'll drop it in the chat here. I did have to register with the Independent in Ireland to be able to read it, but it was just an email verification thing. And their point was that you would think, well, their point was that there isn't a lot of Irish nature writing, so I'm sort of out of luck, right? In England, you've got Robert McFarland, you've got Annie Proulx in the US and Canada, of which I have a book, so I'll share that in a second. But the Rye Post, or the defensive return, has always been that it's been a colonized country, and so the land wasn't theirs. And then when it did become theirs, it was more about growing food on it rather than standing in wonder at it, which I thought was interesting. Here's the quote. So this is a quote with Catherine Nunez, who's I think that's how you say it. That's how I would say it because I'm reading it as Spanish, but maybe it's got an Irish pronunciation. It's interesting that in Ireland there hasn't been quite as much conscious nature writing, agrees Catherine Nunez. Many of the writers we draw on are American or British. One theory is that Ireland was colonized and therefore we never actually owned the land, and when we finally did get ownership of it, it was something to produce food for us rather than to stand and wonder at, which I thought was a funny way of saying. And then I have another quote from that article by John Lewis Stemple. I too am guilty of reinventing the wheel. He's talking about being like a Thoreau of like, ooh. Stemple admits, I wrote a book called The Wild Life about living off the land, and lo, I discovered that being out and about in fresh air, greenery, wind and sun, rain and snow was good for the mind. But, and here's the interesting part for me, I do think that it is time that we moved on and started asking, to paraphrase JFK, what can we do for nature rather than what can nature do for us? End quote. So that's the piece that I really like, because when I read, and it points out in this article that the more modern, the last like 5 years or so of nature writing has been personal impact of relationship with the land and sea, and etc. And that just makes it so much more compelling and accessible to non-scientific people. So Brian of Bookish and I were commiserating about reading Annie Dillard, not Annie Proulx, but Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. I had to read it, I think, for freshman English or summer reading at some point, and just like hated it because it was so tedious. He read it and also found it tedious, but also kind of like gross. Like, I'm not sure what the gross part, I don't remember that, but yeah, it's more like go on a walk and discuss all the things that you notice, but not relating them to your personal experience or relationship or nature, just like making it more scientific. I don't know. So I definitely feature nature memoirs. That's sort of a thing of mine here on the channel in the past year. And I have a curated list of 5-star nature memoirs on Bookshop. So if you visit the Bookshop link for my shop down below, that's one of the options if you go to see the book list. But none of those are Irish. So we have a niche to fill here, folks, which I'm eager to hear who's ready to do it. And let me pop up another question, which is here. Because speaking of nature writing, I got this book. This is the only book I got at the half-off Barnes & Noble sale because of the title, Fen, Bog, and Swamp by Annie Proulx. A short history of peatland destruction and its role in the climate crisis. So obviously climate literature, interesting to me. But Fen, Bog, and Swamp is what caught my eye, because International Bog Day is something I try to remember to shout out every July. And fen is something that is very regional, and it makes me think of Cambridge. So if anyone's been in the Cambridge Fens, that's a very celebrated area with its own folklore and, mysteries, kind of like the famous Sherlock Holmes dog the Hound of the Baskervilles. Like there's lights, fairy lights, or like weird things happening before people understood what it was on the fens, which is cool. There's also lots of murder mysteries because it's very atmospheric. And swamp, I'm not as endeared of the swamp metaphor, but Shrek lived in a swamp, and Florida is a swamp, and DC is a swamp, and there are a lot of places that we've changed, but started out as swamps. And peatland down here. Peat is something I was introduced to in Ireland first, but the question has to do with the word bog. So I'm asking you in the audience, what's an interesting Irish word or meaning, and how did you discover it? And here's my little short story. So in 1995, when I went to Europe with my family, we met some relatives in Ireland for the first time, and I had to learn the word or meaning of bog and bogger. So, let's call it a third cousin. Sean kept saying boggers, or they're in the sticks. And I understood in the sticks because we have a similar metaphor. It just means you're rural, you're sort of like country folk rather than city folk. Well, a bogger means the same thing. I don't think it's a particularly nice thing to say, but it's what someone from the city, like Dublin, would say about people in the back swamps, the back bogs of Cork. And so that's where Sean and his family lived. And so I just thought that was a funny meaning. But yeah, peatland bogs, and maybe this will come next month. But yeah, Irish words or meanings that are fun. Pop them in the comments or in the chat if you're here right now. Let's see if we get any interesting ones. Oh boy. Okay. So Jim's giving us some background. Yeah, the population still hasn't recovered to its pre-famine levels. Yep. RC says, I'm a creature of the wheel, lord of the infernal engine. I think that might be about the raw prose. Jeremy also did not enjoy that book. Wow. Here we are, a bunch of readers that didn't enjoy that book. Interesting. Jim grew up in a town called Slough, which here we have the Columbia Slough, which is basically like a inlet swamp that waxes and wanes its water level. Is that what it's actually named after, Jim? Interesting. And Jeremy points out lots of interesting fantasy and mythology terms from Ireland for fairy creatures and fae, spirits, and even demons, like the Balor demon. I don't know that one. Interesting. Oh, okay. So RC's quoting movies and songs. Okay. I didn't get the reference. Shocking, I know. Anyway, though, Fen, Bog, and Swamp, Irish nature writers. That is my task to anyone visiting this interested in the Irish Readathon or more experienced in Irish nonfiction. Give me recommendations for Irish nature writers. Modern is fine because I will have cleared out at least 3 books after this month. So, hey, I will have room for one, maybe. Trying to keep ahead. Oh, okay. Slough rhymes with plow. It is a marshy place. It doesn't rhyme with plow here, so that's good to know. Okay. It also, in a different meaning, is pronounced slough, like slough off dead skin. Oh, we love the language. We love the language discussion. So I'm glad you're here, Jim. I agree with Jim. I had a friend from college whose last name was Slough. Interesting. Huh. I guess I'm getting my information from a friend who's a natural scientist, so figured she would know how to pronounce it. I will check in with Google. We'll see about that later. Okay. So that's my questions. That's my article. Oh, and I have a final thing that's involved with this. So I don't do the greatest job of looking at my backlist, but I have a video from 2 years ago, little debuting 2-year-old booktube me, where I discussed family heritage and ethnic background and how it affects my writing. So if you're at all curious, I mentioned this recently and didn't have the link. So I went in to pick up the link and popped it in the chat. Did I say Blacklist? I meant Backlist. Backlist of videos. And hold on. This is relevant because I have an Irish/Scottish background and also Czech and German and French. And so I discussed how having those backgrounds as an American, and there was some interesting chat that responded to people who were not American talking about family heritage, which is really cool. How that affected the motivations for my writing and like the curiosities and like things that I pursued. So if you're at all interested, that is the link. That's my AuthorTube video for a while ago. Hi, Heather. Welcome in. The UK version of The Office was based in Slough. Slough. Really? Slough is the same for when a snake sheds its skin. See? Language chat. I love that everyone's chiming in. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. This is my hopeful list. As I said at the beginning, I sort of stopped doing TBRs, but this is my pile of possibilities, and I'm hopeful that I can do these 4 books and like a short story out of the 5th and sort of proceed on and also get a few others. So, and this video, not sponsored by Barry's Tea, but, you know, powered by Barry's Tea. I have to go to a special shop to pick up imported brands of tea that are like really good. So that was a little treat and I'm enjoying it today. So I hope you guys are out able to enjoy a treat for yourself on this lovely Sunday. And yeah, feel free to answer either of the questions in the comments watching this on the replay. Feel free to contribute your recommendations for Irish nature writers. I would love that. And it's only the 5th, so let's be hopeful for the rest of the month. I'm going with the Irish Readathon, and hopefully we'll have some more to report on in my Wednesday wrap-up. So I will see you on Wednesday. That's my other normal time during the week. And until then, happy reading. Thanks all for coming by and watching. I'll see you again soon.